Well, here's one I never thought would fall into the realm of obscurity. Red Faction 2, also known as Red Faction 2.
I don't mean that it's completely unheard of, but whenever anyone talks about Red Faction, nobody ever brings up Red Faction 2, unless it's the topic of conversation.
Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if people were oblivious to the fact that there was a Red Faction 2. The game came out a year after the first one and was set in the same universe, somewhat continuing the story of the first game, but only through bringing up a certain element.
It's a sequel in the same sense that the Black Ops sequels past two are sequels, in which there's one element that connects them. In the Black Ops case, it's the Nova gas, which is usually found in the multiplayer, and in this case, it's nanotechnology found on Mars. Yeah, you can tell this was made in the early 2000s, nanotechnology comes into it.
I was never sure if the nanotechnology is Martian tech that survived, or if it was developed through materials found on Mars by humans. I've never gotten a clear answer on that one. Regardless, in this game it explains Ultor's true motive on Mars. Ultor, as a quick FYI, is a big evil corporation, kinda like Umbrella. They're actually also a big element in both the Red Faction and Saints Row series, which are implied to be part of the same universe somehow. Yeah, good luck figuring that out. Still, they sought to harvest this technology and bring it back to Earth. However, it was stolen, and then was stolen again by a mad dictator, Chancellor Sopart. The Red Faction are also part of this story as a force that is fighting against the corrupt regime of Sopart, but they don't really have much of a connection to their Martian counterparts from the first game. In fact, this is the only game in the series that doesn't take place on Mars, and is barely connected to anything that happens in the first game.
Yeah, this game draws a lot of parallels from Area 51, because like those developers, these guys also put in a lot of bank in Hollywood actors being centre stage. And it worked just as well.
If you watch the behind the scenes of this game, it's very similar as they gush about it for a good portion of the video. They got Lance Henriksen to play Molov, the leader of your character's squad.
Commander Molov, THQ brought in Hollywood veteran Lance Henriksen, known to audiences from films like Aliens and Terminator.
And smarter than anybody else.
It's written in a very focused way. All of these lines that are in this are used as guideposts for something that's going on in the game, but you still have to flesh it out.
With the lines being blurred between interactive entertainment and traditional Hollywood movies, you'll start to see a lot more recognizable names occurring in video games. And by casting Lance, you know, we feel we're on the cutting edge of that movement or that trend.
Behind the scenes, they talk a lot about how great Lance Henriksen is, but nobody brings up the second star, Jason Statham.
Yes, that's right. That Jason Statham is on the credits list. And he isn't mentioned once in the behind the scenes. It's interesting to note though, that neither Lance or Jason were present for the earlier builds of the game. Not even in the E3 demos that were only like 6 months before the finished product was released. And it's even more interesting to note that unlike Molov, who had a placeholder actor who had the same lines.
He's got nowhere else to run. Play it smart and we've got him.
He's got nowhere else to run. Play it smart and we've got him.
Shrike's lines, voice, and even his entire character were changed for the final product.
Made them run! Fear Shrike! Fear Shrike's guns!
Shrike reporting in, inbound with air support. ETA 2 minutes.
This is the only time I can remember that happening where an entire character is changed from the demo to the final product. I mean, yes, minor changes occurred, like sometimes levels appeared in different orders, sometimes you had weapons in the demo that you didn't have in the full game at that point because they wanted to demonstrate them in the demo, that kind of thing. But never did I ever experience a game where they actually change an entire character between development of the demo and development of the game. That's insane.
However, Shrike has a completely different voice in the demo, and his personality is also very different. In the demo, he comes across as manic, kind of juvenile, and rather simplistic in the way that he speaks. He also has a very noticeably different gunship design, which fits those character traits well. Jason Statham's portrayal of the character was toned down significantly, showing him have a gruff British accent and being played a lot more straight.
Don't screw up, Alias. What Chancellor Sopot wants, Chancellor Sopot gets.
Despite this, his appearance doesn't change, which is kind of odd because his blue hair and shirtlessness and tattoos don't really fit Jason's portrayal of the character.
This makes me wonder if the changes made to his character were very last minute after they got Jason Statham to agree to do the part. It's also quite noticeable that Shrike's mental state gets brought up often, going as far as to say that he has psychological issues, but doesn't seem to show any signs of having such issues in his redesign.
Because of his odd appearance and psychological problems, Shrike ended up unemployed and homeless.
As I said earlier, no mention of Jason Statham's involvement is brought up anywhere behind the scenes. It could be that they were saving it as a surprise, but it's not mentioned anywhere but the back of the box, and given the many changes brought up in his character, I wouldn't be surprised if this was a late addition.
A few years ago, I encountered rumours online that this game changed a lot during development, and I have struggled to find the sources of those rumours, or even the rumours themselves. A lot's changed since I last looked in, I think it was 2013 when I last played the games. But what I do know is that there's a lot to support that idea, that this game was constantly shifting in its development to the point where I don't think they ever had a solid idea for this thing.
Another thing that supports this theory is the amount of behind the scenes footage that never appears in the actual game, such as the whole squad fighting side by side, including Shrike, who is using a big ass gun, and footage of Alias flying the gunship, and sniping Sopot, who is also flying a gunship. Really, there's a lot of shit that makes me wonder what context a lot of this was supposed to appear in. But anyway, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. What's this game about? Well, the dictator, Chancellor Sopot, who kinda looks like Joseph Stalin or possibly Saddam Hussein, wanted this nanotechnology so that he could make an army of super soldiers. They're supposedly stronger, smarter, and faster than anyone else, and whatever abilities they previously had were hyped up thanks to the neon glow that dwells inside them.
But because he's not the smartest of cookies, Chancellor Sopot didn't really consider the implications of all this right up until the very end, after he'd finished production entirely of his super army.
Yes, I shit you not, this dumbass dictator realises that he's created an army of godlike soldiers and has given them little by way of a reason not to turn on him. I mean, if you were evil and brilliant, wouldn't you like put a kill switch in their head? Kinda like in Suicide Squad? No? You're just gonna hope they don't turn on you? Okay, fine.
You really know how to put the dick in dictatorship.
Well, he says that, but it's implied in the opening that it's a voluntary procedure to take on. And from what I can understand, there must have been some sort of selection process. I mean, if the FBI has a selection process and background checks, I'd imagine that this super mutant program probably would as well.
Anyway, Sopot has 194 of his 200 soldiers hunted down and destroyed, making the whole process rather pointless, really. The 6 that weren't destroyed managed to escape with the help of the Red Faction and are working together in a mutually beneficial relationship to help overthrow the dictator.
Another flaw in all this is that I keep thinking that the nano soldiers can't have been that much of a threat to the world if every single one of them, bar 6, was hunted down and killed in a matter of months to maybe years after their creation. Seriously.
You play as Alias, the demolitions expert in a seemingly ragtag squadron of these nano soldiers. The only one you knew before was seemingly Shrike, Jason Statham's character. The rest you met after conversion.
Weirdly enough, this isn't brought up again throughout the game. And you'd think that halfway through the game, where it actually matters, it will be brought up, but no. Never again mentioned. Once Alias steals that nano cell, apparently him and Shrike just have a blank slate and just never acknowledge anything that came before it. Which is weird as well, because Shrike used to be Alias's commanding officer according to some wikis and sources, which makes me think, wouldn't there be some tension, you working alongside your boss who is now at your level? The whole dynamic's just weird.
I wouldn't be surprised if the prologue was another thing added late in the story, as its events aren't ever brought up again. I guess it gave Jason Statham more to do, so whoopee for that, I guess. You know, someone once told me, don't ever include a prologue in your story, because prologues are useless. Glad to see this game does break that convention. No, it doesn't. Anyway, the true start of the game is when you break into a News Corporation building, hoping to assassinate Chancellor Sopot as he addresses the nation. You do this by blowing a hole in the front door and shooting up the place, which is a great way to go about it, given that this building has a fucking helipad on the top floor, and Sopot is doing his TV spot on the floor under that. Meaning that if you go for this approach, you have literally 20 seconds to reach him and kill him before he escapes.
Idiots!
Reporting from within the besieged public information building in downtown Sopot City. An armed rebel is holding this reporter at gunpoint. But, thus far, he has not spoken a word or thought to use his weapon. Perhaps the terrorist actually respects this journalist's integrity, hmm?
This takes us through the first act of the game out of, well, there's two. There's the levels building up to overthrowing the dictator, and then there's the ones that take place after that. The first few levels hold the most nostalgic weight for me because they were the ones that I played the most as a kid. Partly because I played the demo a fair bit before buying the game, but also because the further you get into the game, the more tedious it becomes. And as a kid, I think I only played through to the end like twice, because I'd get bored before then. One of my favourite things about these areas is the technology on display. If you look at the desks, you can see all this futuristic computer shit, and other pieces of equipment. Few if any officers have two that are the same for some reason. I did like the way that future tech was done in this era, due to it being based on tech which is rather primitive by today's standards. I would say that they get some credit from me for having flat screen TVs on the wall, but they're the ones with thick frames which are very, very outdated, and therefore they should have known better. Though admittedly it was better than what a lot of science fiction properties were doing at the time. As a kid I watched a show called Medabots, and I find that show to be funny in retrospect, given that it's hard to tell that it takes place in the 22nd century, especially given that everyone has a CRT television set.
Look, I found something. I don't know if you're interested. It's a videotape of that World Championship.
Really?
This game also seemed to predict that they had laptops with two monitors on them, displaying the same shit on both screens. 'Cause that's useful. Why would we need to watch Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1 on two screens at once anyway?
At least the next generation are keeping the classics alive.
I also like the futuristic clothing in this universe. I mean, some of these outfits are just random bits of cloth wrapped around each other. Though I have to admit, if this fashion takes off, I'm really looking forward to the day where ties go out of fashion, because those things are really goddamn dated and are an absolute pain in the ass to wear. Bring on the weird chef suits from the future as soon as fucking possible. I also like the presence that the dictator has on the city, with him having banners and propaganda posters everywhere. There are a few places in this game where you can escape the watchful eye of your benevolent dictator, and whilst it's not really clever, unique or subtle, it's at least nice that this game utilises it.
Sopot says Mind the gap.
Sopot says, mind the tracks, don't mind me. I mind the tracks.
Even after you've overthrown him, he's still very much a presence in the game's world. There's a fair bit of variation on the environments, which is something that I do like about old FPS games from this era. I personally found Time Splitters and Half-Life to do it best, but there is a bit of variety in this one, ranging from offices to military complexes to graveyards and secret labs, and most of the visuals look pretty damn good as well, which is something else I appreciate. At least for 2002 when the game came out. I would say that it's all good, but I do have to admit that the environments get kinda dull as you get further in. For me, all visual joy ends at the C-section, and the secret lab is just the icing on the shit sundae. They're really boring to look at, and it just adds to the monotony of those really boring segments.
There's also a fucking sewer section!
Can game developers just not do these sewer segments ever again? I know that this was made in 2002, and it wasn't really as well voiced as criticism back then, but I fucking hate sewer segments. I hate them, even in good games. The only sewer levels that I can stomach are the ones from Left 4 Dead. The rest can fuck off. By all means, have sewers as part of the level. Maybe as a shortcut or a sneaky access tunnel, but don't make me swim around in piss water for hours on end, walking past the same bit of tunnel and pipe over and over again as I try to tell one part of the level from another. I'm fucking adamant that this is what Purgatory is. Just wading in piss water, dodging turds, and going mad from fucking sensory deprivation. Stop!
Shrike, status report.
We're in a bit of a tight spot. Nothing we can't handle, sir.
I don't want to know.
The game is your standard FPS affair with a slight twist on the formula. The game utilizes geomod technology that supposedly allows you to destroy a lot of the environment, a concept brought over from Red Faction 1.
This is one of the many complaints about this game, that the geomod technology wasn't very well utilized.
Honestly though, you'd think there would be a lot of opportunity in an urban environment that you wouldn't have on the cavernous Mars, but few things are actually destructible in this game's universe, and the things that aren't really there for anything but novelty.
Honestly, it would have been really good to be able to destroy support pillars to cause the ceiling to collapse on your enemies, or be able to destroy the streets so you can explore the sewers, but, well, apparently that was too much work, so occasionally you can destroy some drywall.
This might have been possible, but they sadly put way more effort into rushing this thing out a year after Red Faction 1 came out, because the people were just clamouring for a sequel.
You know, the people who were pissed off that there weren't enough destructive environments in the first game.
Honestly, it took until Guerrilla to make the environment completely destructible, which is kinda sad to be honest. This is also why you play as the demolitions expert and not the squad leader. Seriously, this gimmick is the only reason why he's the main character.
For the honor of the Commonwealth, tonight Sopot dies.
Although he has a nano grenade launcher, whatever the shit that entails, and every kind of grenade imaginable, Alias doesn't really have anything else in his character that supports the whole Demolition Man thing, because he can use any weapon flawlessly, from sniper rifles to heavy machine guns. He's a real jack of all trades.
One thing that I find kind of funny about this is that Alias is told how to do his job by the team sniper at one point, who also hands him the charges that he needs to destroy the bridge that's part of his objective.
Alias, you're the demolitions guy, so I'll leave this to you. To blow the bridge, you'll need to rig all 3 pylons. Knock out the concrete layer on each pylon. Then plant your charge on the steel core inside. When you're done, you'll have 30 seconds to get back here. I'll be watching your back through my scope.
So, let me get this straight. He needs to be told what he's doing in his own profession, and he needs his friends to give him equipment because he left his at home. Alias was really hired for his looks or something, wasn't he?
Again, being the squad leader would make way more sense. In fact, one of the rumours that I read alluded to this being the plan at one point, and I do think that it would have fit the narrative a lot better. Speaking of the narrative, I think it's time that I talk about the plot in more focus, given that you've all had some sort of a break from my information overload of an opening. So, in this story you play as Alias, and, well, he sucks.
I don't understand.
Like, he's really lame. Alias isn't a silent protagonist as was fashionable at the time, but he's a partly voiced character. As in, he has less than 5 lines of dialogue in the whole game.
For the honor of the Commonwealth, get your ass into the silo.
2 in a pre-rendered cutscene, and 2 in-game. I might have missed 1 or 2 lines, but it really doesn't matter. His words have that little impact on the plot.
Whenever Alias does speak, his words either don't affect a thing, or he just gets talked over. So, he has all the personality of a silent protagonist, and the impact of a silent protagonist, but the player can't really put their own spin on his personality like they would be able to with Gordon Freeman or something. So it really is the worst of both worlds.
Really, when he's betrayed at one point, he barely gets a word in before he's told to sit down and shut up like the little wiener that he is. Alias isn't even the worst character in the squad, however. That honour goes to the stealth operative and nerdy forced love interest, Tangier. She's meant to be the sort of femme fatale, sexy stealth operative type character, but her voice actress really isn't up to the task.
Hey, Alias, you here all by your lonesome? I know how to handle these things.
I wouldn't exactly blame Cricket Lay for this, as it seems more like a casting or even a directional error. She's been in other things like Avatar and she was fine in those. Her character's dialogue mostly consists of flirting or badass one-liners.
Great. Controls aren't responding up here. Tangier, you'll have to circumvent it manually.
How would you boys get by without me?
And I feel like her character should be more than that, given that she's the love interest, and really the most proactive character in the whole thing. She's also the only member of your squad who remains loyal to you in the second act.
In truth, I found a lot more of the qualities that she should have in the sniper character Quill. Quill has a much more distinct voice, and much better script. It's not saying much, but she does. And the actor behind her carries the character a lot better than Tangier.
It's implied that Quill and Tangier have some sort of rivalry going on, which may even extend to trying to win Alias's affections.
You're pathetic. I never understood what Tangier saw in you anyway.
In truth, though, I personally think that Quill is way too good for Alias and she should ditch him for someone with more personality. Like a Protectron or something.
Still, maybe if there was a scene or two where Tangier was something other than a flirt or a rough chick, it might not have gotten tiresome as quickly. I get the characters being like this in the opening to big them up a little, especially at this point in history, but it never lets up. As I said though, this isn't a problem unique to her. All of the characters are constantly trying to say one-liners or zingers at every opportunity, to the point where it feels like some sort of parody.
Live in the heart of Sopot City.
How's it going, big
inside
guy?
the public information building. Getting tired of this. This journalist is...
At times, it feels like a not very self-aware Agents of Mayhem. The only character who somewhat escapes this is Molov, the team leader. He takes everything straight and serves as the central authority and narrative pillar to the whole thing. And this makes him kind of the best character as far as the writing goes, as well as the acting.
Our new government would have ushered in an era of peace.
Peace? Then what use would we be? We were created to fight. When Tangier arrives, you three will be declared enemies of the state and publicly executed.
He's incredibly stupid and has no discernible lines of dialogue whatsoever, but he's still one of the better characters in this thing.
Molov is voiced by Lance Henriksen of Aliens fame, and they really want you to know about this. In the behind the scenes, it's one of the only things they talk about, and they never shut the hell up about it. He's equivalent to Powers Booth in Area 51 really, putting in a good performance, but not having the material to back it up and make it mean anything.
With the lines being blurred between interactive entertainment and traditional Hollywood movies, you'll start to see a lot more recognizable names occurring in video games. And by casting Lance, you know, we feel we're on the cutting edge of that movement or that trend.
Hell, he has a generic placeholder actor in the demo and it fits just fine. In fact, no, it works even better because it matches the quality of the writing.
Ironically, they keep saying how this is going to make the game better, but I'd personally say that this is the best case for it being the opposite. That this game is proof on how putting more money into your voice cast is not only a waste of said money, but yields little by way of results. If the money went into resources that could make the world more destructible, maybe this thing wouldn't be the obscure, rather flawed gem that it is today. Not to mention either, that when I'm neck deep in bowel water, going around in circles in the dark, I don't suddenly feel better about it knowing that the arsehole who sent me down here was the bloke from Aliens. That doesn't soften the blow.
Sorry, jeopardize the mission.
Jason Statham was pretty early in his career, so they don't really make as big of a deal out of him as you can imagine. I imagine that if this was like a year or two in the future after this game came out, they would definitely big him up over Lance, but at the time his biggest role was in Transporter, and I'm not sure if they even knew about that film's existence since it came out that year, and it's not really a timeless classic as far as I'm aware. Speaking of Jason Statham, his character is suffering inconsistency, as it's clear that the narrative thinks that he's the Shrike from the E3 demo and not the rather tired sounding British guy that they replaced him with. He somehow has the same look, which I personally think they should have dropped. It wouldn't have been that hard to do, as a black-haired variant of Shrike is seen in the prologue that really fits Jason Statham's portrayal of him even more. Though, I guess this wouldn't have worked for a pre-rendered cutscene if said pre-rendered cutscene was made before these changes were made. Shrike's mental instability was a lot more obvious in previous versions of the game, and whilst going for a more subtle version of the character is fine, he no longer says or does anything to suggest that he does have any psychological differences from anybody else. My guess is that Jason Statham didn't fit the manic personality of the old character, so they had to write his script entirely, and I'm guessing that they didn't know how to write mental illness in any other way than Cicero from Skyrim.
No! My buddy's dead!
I either think that Strike should have had some sort of depression or PTSD, which I think Jason Statham probably could have pulled off better than the manic shit that he had in the E3 demo, or alternatively, he could have voiced Alias instead of Shrike, and that way we at least would have had a better voice for our protagonist that wasn't anywhere near as whiny.
Shrike. Vehicles. A madman with a taste for speed.
In narration, they refer to Shrike as a madman, and in one of his endings they tell you that he has psychological issues that serve as a barrier for him getting employment. I don't know what those issues are though, as it's so poorly conveyed in the game's narrative. I also noticed that Shrike was originally going to be seen on the front lines, as seen in this behind the scenes footage, but you never see him fire a gun in the game, and he's only holding pistols in one scene, and he doesn't even hold them for all that long. Quill is the other aforementioned character who is better than Alias and Tangier, due to her having more of a distinct character design, voice, and personality.
Exterminate! Exterminate!
She's also the more interesting boss battle, given that you have this sniper versus sniper dynamic involved, but it's kind of ruined for me by the fact that you're constantly bombarded by other enemies as well. Reptor is probably my favourite of the squad members, since he's a meathead heavy weapons guy, and he doesn't really have much to him, but he fits the MO perfectly, and he's the most fun support character in the game. Though, rather than the main characters, I much prefer the side characters, like this janitor.
This is not my job! I am not cleaning any of this! I don't do blood and bodies! You get away from me! I quit! I quit!
And this hobo on the train track.
Ooh, ooh, visitor, visitor, can't hurt me. I'm safe down here. Trains can't hit me here, you see. Wouldn't go that way, kid. That's the wrong way. Never turn your back on a train. They kind of sneak up on you.
And the burnt nachos guy.
Damn you! Let me in! Is this about the burnt nachos? I told you, that's the way they're supposed to look! Don't leave me out here!
I don't know, they rub off on me a hell of a lot more than the named and established characters do, and amazingly, they have some more personality traits to some of them as well.
I do kind of appreciate how old FPS like Half-Life and Time Splitters had these silly background characters that brought some sort of levity to the situation. Now things take themselves a little too seriously, which I don't mind if it's good, but when it's not, it really just makes things seem sillier.
There's also Chancellor Sopot, who is voiced by the guy who played Bob in Day of the Dead, and Echo, the hippie Red Faction leader. These characters are kinda one note and a bit cookie cutter, but they at least serve their roles well, which is more than I can say about the protagonist and his love interest. Anyway, I thought we'd talk a bit more about the story, as it gets really crazy in the second act. So, you eventually catch up to Chancellor Sopot and kill him in a, admittedly, very satisfying way.
Dare you threaten your Chancellor? I made you. I can destroy you. Respect your creator! Lay down your weapon! Enough of this! I command you to surrender!
You killed Sopot! Congratulations, Alias! You saved the Commonwealth!
At this point, you return to Red Faction HQ and find that the Red Faction fighters, bar Echo, have all been massacred.
Yeah, it's kind of foreshadowed, but never said before this, that Molov, Quill, Shrike and Reptor aren't really with the Red Faction, and that they basically plan to betray them as soon as they live out their usefulness. Which they do 10 seconds after Sopot's death.
Alias arrives, rather understandably confused, and he's immediately thrown in with the Red Faction as a traitor to the cause.
Alias, my heroic demolitions expert. You are just in time for my announcement to the squad. Sopot's armies have declared their loyalty to me. I am now Chancellor of the Republic of the Commonwealth.
I don't understand. I thought we supported...
The Red Faction, yes, I know.
This is kind of odd because Alias doesn't do much more than ask a question.
I think we all agree that Echo here is an ass.
Okay, that kind of cracks me up.
Where we differ is that you and Tangier support the Red Faction.
Molov says that Alias and Tangier support the Red faction, but there's little by way of evidence of that being the case. They just don't say anything negative about it at all, but they also don't say anything positive. Hell, Shrike does more to support the Red faction than either of them, as he asked for permission to help them at one point. This might have been a better twist in the tale if there was more dialogue from Alias or Tangier that established that this was the case. But Alias has said a grand total of 3 lines before this scene, and none of them were pro or anti-Red faction. Anyway, Shrike conveniently pointed out that he didn't kill anyone in this situation and just witnessed it all. But he seems pretty happy about that.
Yeah, I witnessed it all.
Yeah, I have a bit of a conspiracy theory that Shrike is actually playing both sides in this game. Because while he does rejoin Alias and Tangier, he doesn't do that until the very end of the game. Like, the last line of defense is Molov himself at that point. And that's when Shrike's like, oh, I've changed my mind. I'm not loyal to him anymore. It's almost like he wants to escape punishment for war crimes. Which he does in most endings.
Yep, he has a convenient change of heart right at the last minute, and in most versions of his endings, he doesn't face repercussions from siding with Molov at all. What a crock. Right, Molov is supposedly waiting for Tangier to turn up so that the 3 of them can be executed, but Tangier's invisible in this scene and is already in the room. That's one of her abilities, by the way. It's well established. They didn't just pull that out their arse. And she points a gun at Molov's head, taking him hostage.
Might be a bit of a nitpick, but I find this to be a bit of a flaw, because nano soldiers are meant to be really durable. So, shooting him in the back of their head with a pistol wouldn't kill him.
Hell, you fight Molov in his boss fight without anything protecting him, and he can take multiple grenade launcher blasts to the face without it bothering him in the slightest.
I know that sometimes in-game logic and cutscene logic can change, but then why are nano soldiers a threat if they can die from a single headshot by a pistol? I mean, they're not really a threat then, are they? They're just regular dudes.
And yes, he isn't even the one who killed Sopot. That was Alias. So what authority does Molov even have? Anyway, Tangerine says that she'd kill them all now, but apparently then Molov's army would be on top of them.
So they run away, which results in Molov's army being on top of them.
Honestly, this scene is very messy and weird. A lot had to happen in the space of 2 minutes, and none of it makes sense if you think about it for more than a minute. The rest of the game is just tracking down Molov, which is different from the first act where you track down Sopot.
Yeah, that's kind of the biggest problem with this game. There's 2 objectives, and all you do is just keep chasing them over the course of a 5-hour story. Gets old real fast.
Honestly, I'd prefer if it was like Half-Life 1 where there's one objective, which is overwhelmingly difficult, Time Splitters where there's one objective per level, or even Half-Life 2 where there are multiple objectives that need to be achieved over the course of the game, and one main objective that sort of overhangs.
You do other things like defend citizens and Red faction fighters, but in all honesty, these kind of quests are just optional side objectives that just sort of get in the way. They don't really feel like story developments at any time.
Oh, and the boss fights. Jesus, they suck. Quills is my favourite boss fight, but it's still flawed, and I wouldn't even call it good. Especially given that there's constant ad bombardment, so you don't really get a great sniper duel as implied in the cutscene before it. And towards the end of the fight, they just bombard you with railgun blasts, grenade launchers, and fuck knows what else until you're dead.
So I played through this whole thing with cheat codes enabled to get through it as fast as possible to get the footage for this review. And even then, the game bombarded me to fuck with grenades and shit. Even with hyper regeneration on, I still died from the assault. So from that point on, I defeated every boss by combining the infinite ammo cheat and the rapid railgun cheat, which basically allows me to blast them into oblivion with the most powerful weapon I have. It's not sporting, but neither is being bombarded with bloody grenades from every angle and railguns and whatever the shit else the game felt like throwing at me.
Apparently I'm just doing too well and the game needs to make up for that. Then there's the two Reptor fights. The first is in this stairway clusterfuck that looks like some sort of optical illusion and is shit for navigation. He needs speed and space to navigate properly when facing someone who has a handful of heavy weapons, not a tight, enclosed space. Anyway, after you defeat him here, he turns into... Hold on. Let me just look this up. Reptor Plus. Alright. Who constantly kites around a giant pole thing.
Here will look. Then I'm done.
What is he? 12?
And he also has the ability to fuck up your controls.
Oh, because this wasn't fucking tedious enough.
Then he starts jumping around and is an even bigger pain in the ass to hit, which is just great. And after that test of patience, the game drops a fucking pillar on your head and kills you unless you know to move out of the way, which most first-time players will not.
I had to do that whole pile of bullshit twice because of that.
Molov is the final boss, and his fight is chasing around a mech for a few minutes, and then fighting off a guy with the most powerful gun in the game. As mentioned before, he also takes a fair bit of abuse, but you at least feel like you're on even footing, even if he is being given a lot of damage and health and is otherwise just a normal enemy.
Honestly, these aren't very well designed bosses. To kill them you just need a lot of ammo and patience. They're effectively bullet sponges with very annoying movement patterns.
As for the rest of the game, you might recall me saying that I prefer the first act to the second. This is mainly because it's a lot more straightforward as you push your way through segments on foot, or in some decent enough vehicle segments. Nothing really outstays its welcome in the first act, like the tank segments that last a couple of minutes at most, and end up on a satisfying note. And it also makes sense as to why you'd be in one. Same goes for the gunship segment.
However, the submarine is a different story.
Not only are you forced to spend a level or two underwater where the environment is kinda crap, but you also have full control over the submarine. This sounds good, but then you get to the end of the level where all you do is wait around for Tangier to open up the stupid docking bay, and then you have to guess which one she opened. Cause she sure as shit isn't gonna tell you.
Yes, there's 4 of these things, and if you get it wrong, she tells you to go to the nondescript other one. And they don't tell you which one it is. There's no light indicating it or anything like that. You've just got to go to each of these platforms and figure out if you're supposed to go over it or under it to try and figure out how to get in the bloody thing. Game design.
Honestly, some distinction as to which one is the right one would have been nice, but they offer you no such visual or auditory help. Unless you count Tangier's helpful suggestion of not screwing around as help. I also found the Sopot statue environment at the end to be a bit of a chore to sift through. There aren't as many civilians to take the edge off as there were in the first 2 acts, and the Red Faction troopers don't appear either, and the game kinda drags at that point. In Area 51, it was really interesting to see the final area and to see where all the horrors came from. In Red Faction 2, it's kind of the opposite. That's just where it gets really boring. It's also hard to earn hero points in this bit, which is a reward for doing certain good actions like optional objectives and saving Red Faction troops, and civilians even, from certain death. It's easy to lose this by accidentally killing civilians.
Yeah, accidentally.
Or accidentally killing Red Faction troops.
And guess who gets the blame for that every time it happens?
Thing won't open!
Oh, him, mate.
Don't.
Well, I was trying to help.
Depending on where the little meter is, that you can keep track of in the pause menu, you end up getting the best, good, bad, or even the worst ending. As a kid, I always got the worst possible ending because killing civilians was always too funny to resist back then.
I'm much more calm in my old age, so I only murder about 80% of civilians now.
It's rather difficult to redeem yourself in the last segment, which kinda sucks, especially given that civilians kinda have a tendency to run right into your firing line and get themselves killed like a bunch of stupid arseholes. Your teammates are also guilty of this, stepping in front of you as you fire grenade launcher rounds and causing them to blow up in your face. 'Cause they smart! Another cardinal sin of this game's design is that it has respawning enemies, especially on the harder difficulties, and the director's cut is a fucking nightmare. In fact, the director's cut just bombards you with enemies until you're dead, making it very difficult to play to the point of frustration.
I wasn't able to find any differences between the original cut and the director's cut. The closest things that I got was an old walkthrough from 2007 that said, God help you if you're on director's mode, which is always encouraging, and a random Steam user who said that the code unlocks everything. No, it doesn't. So anyway, I gave it a whirl, and apparently the director is sadistic and just sent hordes of enemies that endlessly respawn at you. And the game's a lot harder as well, even on the easiest difficulty. As far as I can tell, it's like a ramped up difficulty setting, and doesn't really change much. If you were expecting, I don't know, alternate cutscenes or new dialogue or anything, you're as disappointed as I am.
If you play it on an easier difficulty, you might not have any issues with respawning enemies, but it is something that I'm glad is gone from game design entirely. Sure, it has its place, like if they want you to move on from a certain objective, but there's nothing more annoying than constantly being pestered by manhacks whilst neck deep in turd water bobbing for sanitary towels. Oh, and to add on to its list of no-nos, the game is way too damn dark sometimes, and instead of a flashlight, you get this awkward as fuck night vision, which sometimes doesn't help at all. I would ask for a flashlight instead, but I'd rather just ask for the game to not be this dark at all. It's not like it's atmospheric or anything, it's just annoying. Honestly, Red Faction 2 is a refreshingly ambitious game, and despite its many flaws, it kinda still holds a nostalgic value for me. As a game, it's okay to play. I wouldn't call it bad, but better did exist at the time, and it didn't really break any new ground. Still, it's competently put together, and it's playable from beginning to end and even enjoyable for some players. Most Red Faction fans kind of ignore this one though, unless they're on some sort of completionist run, as it's kind of the black sheep of the series. It also currently has no place in the official Red Faction canon, because Guerrilla seems to take place before and after it, given that the nano soldiers in this game were processed in 2161.
Weirdly enough, it's the year that Fallout 1 happened.
But in Red Faction Guerrilla, which takes place in 2125, you can find a recording of sorts detailing Alias's dying words, nearly 40 years before he was processed.
So I'm guessing that Alias fell through a time portal and died on Mars in the past. Seems logical.
Either that or they retconned Red Faction 2 so that it took place in the early 2100s instead of the mid to late 2100s. That's equally possible.
Or they erased it from time and space because nobody liked it. I don't know.
Regardless, this is a bit of an Alien 3 scenario where it's just like, oh, by the way, everyone in the set 1 just died. Oh, thanks. I kind of grew up with those characters, glad to hear they all just rotted and died on a foreign planet. Admittedly, this game stands out for a lot of reasons, and I can understand why some would feel that it strays away from what they believed the series was about.
Personally, I see it more like a Halloween 3 kind of an affair, where they were trying to do a sort of anthology series where each one was in a different part of said universe. but like Halloween 3, it got too far away from its predecessors and people didn't like that very much.
Oddly enough, this was the only game in the series that I actually liked growing up, and it's the only one that I've finished to date. Guess that makes me some sort of weird bastard, but whatever. I'd definitely say that you could do worse than Red Faction 2, though most would recommend the original or Guerrilla over it, and I'm assuming that they make more sense than this one does, so I will as well. Not to mention that I can tell you that the Geomod technology works a hell of a lot in future installments than it does in this game.
Well, I guess that's it for Volition's sci-fi epic. This one, anyway. Join me next time as I go on a swashbuckling adventure. Come to think of it, I might need a crew.
Another stuck door. As Tenju would say, I know how to handle these things.